To have a good harvest, one must plant good seeds and must also use the right kind of fertilizer. The carrots have grown large and firm. How good they will taste.
Well, good morning, ladies and gentlemen, gardeners and homesteaders. Welcome back to the Backyard Gardens podcast. A little slip up there. Yes, so welcome everybody. Don't worry, we're not only going to talk about tomatoes today. More than likely, the word tomato is in the title, but it's there for a reason. Batavia, have you been guilty of growing a $100 tomato, though?
Have I ever introduced you to the cage baby?
I said 100, not 500.
Yeah. Yes, I have. And damn, was that a good tomato?
Yeah. So, there's this whole thing in the garden community, and it's split, it seems like, where people grow to save money, people grow for knowing where their food comes from and all that stuff. And I get what we're here for today is to really try and flesh out if we can combine those together. Mm-hmm. I think that's going to be a safe bet. It doesn't have to be one way or the other, and I don't think it should be. Do you?
No, I think that it's not absolute.
Right.
I think unless you're growing all of the food to sell, I think that's the only way that it's absolute. All right. I want to save money on my business's budget. But if you're talking about home gardeners or if you're talking about homesteaders, I think it has to be a little bit of both, or at least more than one thing.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I think that, it's difficult because the way of the world is expensive these days. And things kind of keep coming up, and the prices just keep going up and up and up and up and up. Mm-hmm. And by the time this is released, there should be a video on my YouTube channel where I actually came across a grocery ad from 2001, and so we'll have talked about it on there. I have plans for it. It should be out by now, but it was when I saw it, it was super eye-opening because the years are definitely muddied over time about what things cost, as they should be. We get older, we forget. And when that in 2001, I was definitely, how old was I? I was 21 years old. And I wasn't really in the mode of, I was just coming into shopping for myself and stuff like that. So I wasn't as hyper aware as I am now.
Yeah. I would have been just a couple of years older than young Ben, as we always are reminded.
Look, I got to take it where I can get it. You know what I mean?
Yeah. But back then, many of the meals that I ate were from some fast food restaurant, along with being served as with a cocktail out with friends, right? It was about definitely what was fast, not necessarily inconvenient, not necessarily what was the healthiest for sure. Boy, talk about a young person's metabolism.
Yeah.
But as I've shared before, I'm a huge fan of the grocery store. I was going to the grocery store since I was 7 or 8 with my parents as a weekly activity. Wasn't crazy about it then because I couldn't play outside. But those things, you're talking about years of input and seeing and absorbing. And even then, as I got to my 20s and I was shopping for myself, I still didn't have the awareness because when I used to go to the grocery store, it wasn't like I was pulling money out of my pocket. So you go back to your 2000s, and that's probably the very beginning at the earliest where I'm paying attention to things. And I'm almost looking at it like decade by decade, kind of expensive things in my 20s versus expensive things in my 30s, and now expensive things in my 40s. And boy.
Well, and the one thing that I think is important as we get into this conversation is, you hear now food's so expensive, it's so expensive. Well, even back then people were saying that.
Yeah.
And when you look at the prices from then, like I haven't really done a deep dive on that that ad that I have, but it was, it was shocking to see what little bit I saw, how cheap it was. But I clearly remember people, especially the old timers, you know, I just can't believe it's so expensive. And I remember my grandfather saying, you know, I'd take a nickel and I'd go and I'd get a soda and a cheeseburger and I don't, maybe some fries and a candy bar. I mean, I don't really know what it was that he spent, but it was like a fraction of the cost. And this was around the same time frame this ad came out that the dollar menus were born at the fast food restaurants too. So now there's no such thing as a dollar menu. It's the $3 menu. So that just kind of puts it in perspective. But if we apply it to gardening, there's two sides of gardeners, it seems like. There's gardeners that just are concerned, or there's way more than two sides. There's gardeners that are concerned about knowing where their food comes from, what's on their food, completely respectable point of view. There's gardeners that are like, hey, I want to have affordable food and this is going to be my path, which is a good plan, but you need to know how to do it.
Yeah.
And then the next one is people that grow stuff. They're like, hey, I can't get this, so I want to grow this. And, you know, all of this kind of comes into play, but I think we can blend each one of those topics all together.
I'll also add, you know, and it's along the lines of, you could say, I can't get this. I think you're talking about like just, it's not available, but the quality of, right? You know, so in the last 15 years, for sure, there has been a lot more information available to the public about the quality of what's in your stores, what's in your, you know, restaurants. You took the dollar menu right out of my mouth, or out of my head when I was thinking about it. And if you go, what is it, like almost $10 for a value meal, a soda, you know, a sandwich and some fries. Yeah. Like that was unthinkable back in 2000, right? And so then I think about, well, I'm not growing anything that's going to create a soda. You know, I am growing potatoes, you know, and of course I'm not raising any beef, you know, but I could put together a sandwich with some of the things that come out of my garden. And it's not, but that's the part that I actually want to shift away from a little bit in our conversation. And Ben and I arm wrestled over this bit of it. It doesn't have to be dollar for dollar savings in my mind.
Yeah, it's cut and dry for me. There. Yeah, well, I'm gonna reel it in real quick. It's cut and dry in my mind. Yeah. It's, you know, if and that's if your goal is this though. You know, if my goal is, hey, I'm gonna grow food and I want to save money at the grocery store, then in my mind it is dollar for dollar savings. Now that being said, you need to look at it and compare your prices appropriately, meaning if you're growing organic food, you need to apply your prices to the organic food at the store. If you're growing conventional form, meaning I mean, look, I don't need to explain what conventional is, but you don't use any kind of organic treatments, everything is synthetic or man-made or whatever, then you need to apply your prices to that. That's my opinion. So that is dollar for dollar. But I think there's also where I go with Batavia is there's a little bit of grace that can be involved in that too. And there are times when that comes into play. But there's and we talked about this earlier, there's some crops that are very valuable in your garden. And then there's some crops that are just, there's no value, extra value in growing them at all, other than the fact that, like, you know where they come from. But, you know, you have to have your goal. You know, some people are hobby gardeners. Some people are survivalist gardeners. Some people are just, I don't know what another one is, but, you know, homesteaders and gardeners and all kinds of things. So there should be a happy medium. Now, when I was a kid, people grew gardens for one reason and one reason only, to save money. That was the end of story.
Yeah, I think, so let me take green beans, right? It's a crop that I believe is, generally speaking, still reasonably priced in stores, whether you're buying them canned or frozen, right? I don't have any pictures of green beans in my phone, but I'm going to go with...
I have a grocery store website pulled up, so I'll be actively looking stuff up.
I appreciate that. And then you look to see what a package of seeds will cost you from Backyard Gardens seed shop over on Etsy.
Nice.
And then what those seeds can produce in your garden. unless you get caught by some type of disease, some type of drought, some type of tsunami in your garden, the amount of beans that can be produced from some of these plants, I mean, it'll blow your hair back, right? So I look at something like green beans and say, dollar for dollar, I believe they will save you money if you grow them. But this is the part. Do I grow 40 green bean plants because they're going to save me money? And I just, I could take or leave green beans. That's the part where each gardener is individual. And I think that it's absolutely okay to grow something else that may not have the same type of dollar savings as green beans, right? It doesn't mean that you don't have to grow any of them, but it doesn't mean you have to grow all of them. I feel like when people, I know this isn't your message, but I feel like when I hear like I'm gardening to save money, it almost feels like I'm just going to grow the thing that's going to save me the most money. Like that's the way I turn that around in my head.
Yeah, no, I think that's two different categories. I think there's two different categories there, and I do know what you're talking about. Mm-hmm. Let me put it this way. If you are going, let me just get this out of the way. If you're going to save money gardening, start your seeds. Okay, if that's what you wanted to hear, see you bye. There's more other factors into it, but this is a huge factor. And green beans is really important to bring up though, because it's not one that you typically buy a seedling for. Right. And so I put a poll up or a little quiz thing up on YouTube. I've been trying to do them I think it's Friday they come out. And coincidentally enough, one of them was how much does a green bean plant produce? And there's a range, so you're not going to get an exact answer, okay? But on average, it gets between 0.5 and 2 pounds. Okay, so let's say 1 pound to 2 pounds of green beans per plant. So this is where your knowledge of plants will come in very, very handy, because a big part of what we do is we do spacing, and getting your spacing down is really important. It's critical. So we know that we can really pack green beans onto a trellis. You can put them in 4 to 6 inches apart roughly. Is a pretty safe bet. So for every foot, you can have 3 green beans. Every linear foot of garden, you can have 3 plants of green beans, which could bring you upwards of 6 pounds of green beans in a season. Now I'm looking on the grocery store. It's $2.57 for fresh green beans for 12 ounces. So you buy a pack of seeds, cheap. I think what are they on all our seeds are the same price. I can't remember what they are. Do you know what they are? $3.50 a pack of seeds. There's enough there for an 8-foot row. I'm more sure of. So, you're looking for each plant right here. What is that? 16 ounces in a pound, 2 pounds. That would be 36 ounces. So you're looking at $6 worth of green beans per plant. You know what I mean? Like there's a cost savings there. Now we've got to factor in other things such as fertilizer, water, dirt, and effort. I always want to factor in the manpower involved in this, because my time is worth money, as your time as a listener is worth money too. I mean, you get paid to go to work, so you got to factor that in.
I may have a different opinion about that, but we're not going to derail this conversation. We could talk off air and talk about whether if it makes sense to fold that in.
Get
that's a whole different kind of theory on life. But you look at something like these green beans, and thank goodness you did that math, because
it was tough.
Yeah,
I was trying not to look like an idiot.
You almost have to break it down like from that per plant, per vegetable perspective to make rhyme or reason of it. But to your point, that's almost never what someone's doing. And maybe that's a little bit extreme. I don't feel like the kind of immediate comment of it's not worth it, it's not saving me money, considers all of those factors. Quiet is kept. If you were really down to the dollar and cents, if you do fold in your labor rate for whatever you've decided that's going to be, I believe in a garden season, depending on what you plant, you may not save money, right? I think that because you've not come into it with the thoughtfulness of that breakdown that you just did in beans. And that's the reason why my mind always goes to, well, plant the thing that's going to save you the most money. Right. And so I think that it's a very rigid way to look at it when you talk about, is it saving me money? Plainly put, you had a bad crop of something and it's like, well, no, I'm not saving money. You think about all of the money you pay, even if you're going to buy soil in bulk, right? It's the upfront costs.
Yeah.
Right. And then are you extrapolating that over years? Like, that's the conversation I want to have when you talk about gardening doesn't save me money. Right. I know you're not saying that, but I'm looking at it to say over years, when does that garden bed pay for itself? What are you growing in that garden bed or in your garden to make sure that that thing pays for itself? It's just much more comprehensive, I think. And I don't want that to be kind of like an easy button for me, but I believe that it is.
Well, it's a hard one, because so first of all, I like this aspect of it. You build a bed, whatever you spend on your bed, whatever kind of bed you get, great. And then you take that out and then you fill it up with dirt. Mm-hmm. And then you say, hey, I spent, let's just call it $100 on it. And then you go, okay. And then you grow your plants. And then it's how over time, how long will this bed last versus how much will I save? Now, this is part of the conversation. I don't really want to get too hung up on this because ultimately we could all just put an in-ground bed in and save a lot of money. Mm-hmm. You don't have to have raised beds. It's, your soil's just fine. Mm-hmm. It's just, it's okay. But it is a part of it. It's like, I had learned a long time ago, I was looking, I was going to buy a boat and I was going to spend $5,000 on the boat. And my dad said, you're going to use the boat. How often are you going to take the boat? And I was like, I'm going to take it out every day in the summertime. He's like, okay, fine, take it out every day. Now, how long are you going to keep the boat? And so basically what we ended up doing is figuring out per day how much I was paying to have the boat. Even though I paid up front, how much was that going to pay? And when I sat down and looked at it, I was like, okay, I need to get less of a boat. Because then I was like, well, then I got to put fuel in it, this, that, and the other. Yeah. Same thing here. Are you going to grow out of your bed constantly? Are you going to densely plant your bed so you get enough out of it? These are the questions that need to be asked. And the other thing is, I don't ever recommend you look and say, what am I going to plant? What's worth the most? Like, how am I going to save the most money? I always think that you should be like, what am I going to consume the most of? Because that's how you're really going to come into, because look, if you don't eat carrots and you grow a full bed of carrots, but you eat a lot of, pick a vegetable, I don't care, squash, and you're like, well, I'm going to plant my carrots instead of my squash this year. You're just going to go to the grocery store and buy the squash all the time, and you're going to leave the carrots sitting behind. Yeah. So you might as well just grow the squash and go buy a bag of carrots and call it a day. Yeah. And that's like the first place where you're going to start losing.
But I think it takes us time to get to that point. Your poll answers the question of, all right, how many green beans plants should I plant? I had to look up what does a pound of green beans look like. So visually, I needed to be able to see that. And then it's like, all right, now I know how many bags I would be getting out of my garden, right? And I think some people come into gardening that methodical, but I don't think that all people do. And I think that some people that say it's not worth it don't have that kind of breakdown in their head. And you know what? It's your deal, right? If you want to step away from gardening because you didn't think it was worth it monetarily, then that's your bag, right? I'm not going to drag you back kicking and screaming. But what I will say is the measure of worth it, the measure of savings, I'm clearly using a different barometer than some.
Yeah. I mean, my whole thing is if you're going to walk away because of that, then I'm going to drag you back because I'm going to teach you that it's possible. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And go ahead.
I think this is when we did an episode, I believe this is the only episode we'll ever remember the title for. It was something along the lines of the evolution of the gardener or the evolution of the garden last year. And this is the part, whether it's gardening or your own life, sometimes we need to be more forgiving about where you are may be very different than where you started, right? You know, like when you get to the point of thinking about when you started gardening, young Ben, I feel like you've been like, you know, a soldier and this has been your mission for the last nearly 20 years. But did you feel this way back then?
No. Dude, my first garden, look, I built a garden because I had a playhouse in my backyard when I bought my house, and it had a sand pit, and I didn't know what to do with it, so I built a garden bed around it. And I didn't care about any of that stuff. I was going to the store, and I was buying all the transplants all day long. It didn't matter to me, and I was thrilled to death to have produce coming out of my garden every day. I could care less about any of this stuff. But as time grew and gardens grew, and then we finally came into this garden, and this garden's grown to the way it is, the question had to become, is it really worth it to do this? You know, like we had to take a step back and say, are we wasting money? You know, because, you know, in my life, I can remember multiple times when prices significantly jumped in my life. I can remember it was, I'm just going to start from when I was of age of being an adult. Well, first of all, I remember when gas was 80 cents a gallon when I was a kid. And then I remember when Katrina hit and they went to 2+, and that was like the end of the world. Everybody freaked out. And then we went a really long time. And then we came into, I think it was like the crash of 2008 and things. The prices didn't go up, but everybody was losing their jobs. There's a lot of money being missing, stuff like that. And I had insulated myself with my career path at the time. I had picked a pretty healthy career path. And then I remember, everybody listening to this remembers COVID. You know, and then inflation just kind of took off the way it has, you know, and it's not really a hyperinflation situation. I'm going to use that term, but that's not really what is hyperinflation is when you wake up one day and a loaf of bread costs $2,000. That's not, in this country, we have not seen that, but it feels like it because it went up 20%. And I don't remember what the numbers are, but anyways, it's continuously gone up. And I also remember in my life multiple times when there was no food available. I remember multiple times of not being able to go to the grocery stores, grocery stores not being open, food not being delivered. Now, it didn't last long, but, you know, you can't go to the grocery store one day and you're like, oh, boy, like, what's going on? You know what I mean? Like, I'm fitting to starve. And look, clearly, I'm not going to starve. I mean, if you've seen me, you know I ain't hungry.
But it's going to feel that way for a period.
Yeah. But so I didn't, but to answer your question, no, I did not start that way at all. But I evolved into that kind of framework. How about you? Did you start thinking about that?
So I'm not going to take you through my timeline because who knows who can remember all of those bits, but I could pinpoint the things that you described in those milestones. No, and it's special to me because it's one of those moments where I realized that I was called to do this, right? So I was buying my first home. I had stayed in some apartments, buying my first home. And the place that I live now, I walked to the backyard and it was like, maybe I walked through the house and walked into the backyard. It had this beautiful deck. And so one of my thoughts was, I can have some kick parties here, right? It's like two-step deck, 2-layer deck or whatever, or level. And then along the side where the cage baby is currently, along the side of the fence was like this kind of matted, muddy kind of area, leaves all over the place. And I thought, I could have a garden here. Now, my grandparents, my grandmother would have like a handful of containers she'd plant flowers in every spring or every summer. And then I remembered the community garden. But it wasn't all of my childhood, but I remember as a child, like one of the ones that you're kind of afraid and you're holding in that case, of my grandmother's hand. Like maybe I was 6 or 7. So I do have those spots. I have like someone brought some shell and peas up from Mississippi and you got to spend most of your morning shell. Like I remember those bits, but there is nothing in that moment or that next summer when I started the garden that made me think, oh, I'm absolutely going to be successful at this. I don't even know if I really thought that it would be hard. It's kind of like you plant stuff and then it works. But to your same point, it was like, oh, it's so cool. Like, you know, it's calling my grandmother, like, I got some cucumbers, you know.
Yeah.
And she didn't even eat cucumbers anymore, but that's beside the point. So I look at that and then I say, there is something that brought me joy in that summer over summer. And so then as I continued, you know, first summer, second summer, third summer, my curiosity, my desire to grow different and more things really set in. And so then that kind of brings you where you are here. But so no, I definitely didn't feel the way that I feel. Like I have evolved as a gardener. Go check that episode out. But I also want to know, and we're not going to spend any time here because, you know, there's some negative connotations to it. But we oftentimes look at dollar for dollar when it comes to, oh, you know, things are so expensive. You know, you could go, but you could still go to the grocery store and get some onions for this low price. At the rate that we're going when it comes to prices in the grocery store and prices at restaurants and fast food spots, you also have to look across what we're paying for as a people. Yeah. Right. You know, you look at housing, you look at automobiles, you look at gas, like you brought up, like all of that. When I think about, is gardening too expensive? I think about all of those things, right? Like you think about the ways that you're trying to make cutbacks in streaming services and all that. Like your family's budget is what I consider when I think about, is gardening too expensive?
Yeah. Yeah. So first of all, I have those clear memories of like you said, like somebody bringing produce. Like I always, at some point every year in my life, we would have some kind of produce brought to us that we would have to do something with. Now I did. So actually, I'm going to go back way back when I was a young lad. And I didn't know this at the time, but I grew up, I had one tree in my yard and I had a pecan tree. And notice I said pecan, not pecan. Sorry, everybody that disagrees. But it was so big that if I stood as an adult and I put my arms around it, like I would only get halfway around it. But we would get pecans every year. And now that I'm an adult and I'm buying pecans, bro, we were getting hundreds of dollars of pecans every year off of that tree. Hundreds. I'm not even exaggerating at all. Not to mention the mailman would come by and pick 4 pounds of pecans off the ground every fall and take with them. Like it was just unbelievable. So I did recognize that at the time. And we would always have people like beating down the door to get to these pecans. They just wanted the pecans, but I could never figure out why. But this was one of the reasons. So, it just kind of came to me real quick though. It's funny, all these years, and it just like came to me at once. But no, it is expensive across the board. And I've always said this: if you're looking to save, like on your phone bill, for instance, what is wrong with your computer screen?
Sorry, I got excited typing something.
Yeah, it started moving like dramatically. If you want to save money on like your phone bill, and so you cut your plan back by $2 a month, big deal. But if you cut back $2 here, $5 here, and, you know, in every category you cut back a couple bucks, and you're saving $20 a month. Multiply that by year, you save money, right? Same with your food bill, though. So it's important to realize that like it's 100% possible, and you have to remember we can sit here and talk about this stuff like, oh, you should be doing this, but we started just like everybody else, where it was like I didn't care. I didn't care what it cost. Whatever it cost, I was going to buy the food and I was going to grow it myself. I didn't care if I had to pay $10 for a squash plant that was going to get eaten by a squash vine borer in 1 month. If I got one squash off of it, damn it, that was going to be the best squash I ever ate. And I knew it. You couldn't tell me any different. But over time, things started to change and I got more and more interested in starting seeds. And then it's like this, and as these past few years have kind of come about and I've really started looking at it, I've seen the cost savings more, especially since the price of food has gotten so much higher. I don't want to say so high. It's very nuanced the way I speak sometimes. So much higher. that you can start to really see the savings now. You know what I mean? And we just went through, and I was looking, like, I've got a peach tree. I'm on my 3rd year harvesting off of it. As of right now, I counted the other day because my wife, she got out of the car. She's like, there's no peaches on the peach tree. And I was like, shut up. And I walked over there. I counted 70 peaches on it. And so I looked, and they're $1.32 a peach at the store. No, was that the case? No, it's $2 a peach. And so I did the math, and just this year alone, it's over $140 in peaches. So it's like, and that's on my 3rd year of harvesting them off of a tree that I paid $20 on discount for. I never water it. I put down 1 handful of fertilizer twice a year, and that's it. I mean, there's no other way to say that that is definitely a cost savings, right?
Would you have bought 70 peaches before?
Oh, absolutely. I love peaches more than any. Peaches and plums are my jam.
Yeah, so I actually prefer nectarines, but and again,
you can't grow a nectarine.
Well, I'm going to move on.
It's a well, hold on, wait. It's interesting. They're grafted, so it's I believe it's a pitless peach that accidentally grows, and then they take the branch and they graft it onto a peach tree. Isn't that interesting?
It is interesting, but somebody's growing it, which means I could if I wanted to. But I guess my point is that's the reason why this is complicated. So if I felt like I could get 70 peaches off of my little Chicago plot of land, I'd be putting a tree out there. And I'm not saying that I couldn't, but if I believe that, all right, I don't have to worry about the squirrels or the raccoons eating these peaches or the birds, I could come away with those peaches, I would figure out a way to make that worth my investment in time and enjoyment. Now, I do enjoy peaches. Don't get me wrong. The furriness sometimes, is a little bit weird for me, but I look at gardening and I say it's similar to the green bean exercise. There are things that I adjust when it comes to my diet based on what does well, based on what is easier to grow, based on what may be, not as expensive. We talked about this a couple of years ago during my frustration of potatoes, right? It started off that way, but it didn't end with that much joy when we talked about it.
It ended up being potatoes.
Yeah. But you look at something like, and I don't have a potato harvest yet, but I planted about half of my potatoes from seed are from potatoes from last year's harvest. And the other half, I picked up a $6, $7 bag from, the home improvement store this spring, and I'll be planting them out. You figure out ways to make adjustments, right? For someone that is growing hundreds of pounds of potatoes, which I'm not, for someone growing hundreds of pounds of potatoes, it may be worthwhile paying $30 for seed potatoes, right? You know, when you think about what that end result is. And I think that's the grace that I want to give us. Sometimes it takes season over season to figure out, all right, no, absolutely. You know how many birthday pies that I can make with 70 peaches? Back then when I was looking at that little muddy plot of land, the idea of home canning wasn't even a concept for me. Even if there was a peach tree, I'd have been staring like, what am I going to do with that?
And so that's funny because I get that a lot. What are you going to do with all those peaches? And, I get that with everything that I grow, actually.
Same.
I grow a lot of, what are you going to do with all that? And it's like, well, I mean, let's just talk about the peaches since I feel like talking about peaches. I'm going to gorge on them, and then we're going to make peach pie filling and can that. Now, when I can that peach pie filling, guess how much that's going to be worth? $4 a can. And you see that, and then you start, and so then the question is, well, do you eat that much peach pie? Normally I don't, but it's important that in this conversation, shout out to another episode we did, that gardening is a lifestyle. It is a lifestyle because you are our favorite listener. That's right, you are. We have to ask you.
Wait, hold on. Okay.
We have
Can't
to
give
ask
our favorite
you
listener that, rinky-dink bell.
No. We have to ask this question, and I want you to think to yourself, if you didn't have a garden, how much fresh produce would you be consuming in relation to what you are now? Because it definitely, when you grow that food, and I know a lot of people like to give away their produce, and that's fine. once you start canning, you'll kind of move away from that, I think. It's just a natural progression in the garden. But, you know, once you start growing your food, you start consuming more of it. And that's why I always recommend, like, dude, whatever you're going to plant, just make sure you already eat it. Like, there's a reason why I tried to grow Brussels sprouts for 5 years in a row and got a harvest on the 5th year. Because I wanted to do. Now, you know how much that cost me to do that?
How much?
$10, and I still have seeds for the next 5 years. You know what I mean? Like, it's not like I wasn't SOL. Well, I take that back, because the first year I did buy 6 packs, so it's more than that. But overly speaking, now that I start seeds exclusively, that barrier to entry has dramatically dropped. And so it's just the progression of my story in my garden, just like everybody has their own story in their own garden.
Yeah, I think what you eat as much, fresh vegetables or vegetables in general. I think it's such an important question, because I think that the value that we put on vegetables is different when you grow it yourself, right? I think that because a lot of the things that we buy from stores aren't always fresh vegetables, so it's like, what's the dent? Did it put a dent into my food budget? Well, a lot of the things that you buy at the store, you wouldn't be raising in your garden anyway. So there is that. But I also look at this to say, I eat more collard greens now, hands down, than I ever did before I started growing them. Right. I don't even know if it was my favorite green before I started growing it, Yeah. And I look at this to say, you have to be open to what's going to come to you as a favorite.
Well, so I'm going to give you an example right now. Can you do me a favor? Can you hold up both of your hands? And you have arms on your chair?
I do.
I want you to reach down and hold on to them tight. Because what I'm going to say might blow you out of your chair. Last year, I started, we started back eating meat again. And so I fell in love with the BLT. So the thing that I'm going to say is, I have eaten more tomatoes because of my garden than I would ever have eaten in my whole life. Why is that a big deal? Because I don't like tomatoes. I don't like a raw tomato. But because of my garden, I have introduced that into my diet more often, and same thing with cabbage. Like, I enjoyed cabbage before, but I just harvested 10 cabbages out of my garden, and I'm going to eat every single one of those cabbages in some form or fashion. And so this is the diverse diet, the diverse garden, the lifestyle of a gardener. We were talking before the show about when you're harvesting your produce and you sit down, the question is, do you sit down and say, okay, what are we eating this week? And then the next thing is, what's coming out of the garden that we can incorporate into our meals? Is that what's occurring? Or is it, what are we eating this week? And then you're like, well, I could throw this produce in. Or are you basing your meals around your garden in any form or fashion? And my opinion is, if you're asking the question, well, what's coming out of the garden this week? That's more of a almost like a homesteader thought process, I believe. And then the hobby gardener is just like, hey, I've got some tomatoes. I'll eat a tomato sandwich here and there, or I'll eat a pickle.
I think there could be some connection to, so going back to my young days as a grocery shopper, well, really a helper. Or really, I was too young to stay at home by myself, and so I just had to go. Yeah. Very much so shopping based on what's on sale.
Yes.
Right.
That's all I ever did.
Yeah. A lot of what was bought wasn't bought for the current week, so because there was a stockpile of sorts that we kept. Very fortunate in having, and on one hand, I say very fortunate, and I say that because I recognize many people aren't, but I do believe it is our right to be able to have access to food. But freezers and pantry shelves, right? And if you look at what's on sale, there's almost a relationship to what's coming out of the garden, right? So I'm going to eat what's coming out of the garden. And there's a level of obedience to that too, right? Like, I planted it with the intention of eating it. And now it's ready to consume. And forget what I have a taste for, which is a whole episode in of itself. I don't know on whose show, but, forget what I have a taste for. I need to be obedient in. I've invested time, money, energy, and now this thing is ready. Let's go ahead and enjoy that. Because I only planted it because I planned on eating it, and it should be enjoyable. When I listen to, I'm going to pivot just a quick second. When I listen to you say I have 10 cabbage, I love the 10 cabbage because that's your plan. You designed that plan, right? To get your money's worth out of the garden. You don't have to grow 10 cabbages, right? But you do have to figure out what's going to be in the space where those 10 cabbages are growing and when they're going to be ready and when you're going to eat them. One of the beautiful things about cabbage is how long they keep as a crop once you've harvested them. And
that's my exact point. So first of all, my plan was 15 cabbages. And we ended up with 10. So there's that. But no, that is my exact point. So at the time of harvesting, those cabbages were $5 a head at the store. So that's $50 worth of cabbages that we harvested. That's 10 seeds. I put 2 seeds in a cell. That's 20 seeds. There's 300 seeds. I don't know how many seeds were in the pack. So, I know how much they weighed, but that's just because now we weigh seeds to sell them. So I get that aspect of it. But you can see that there's definitely this progression over time of doing this. And, we knew that when we planted it, there's multifaceted reasons for that. And we can get into this in another episode. But because of the storage rate of those cabbages is why we planted it, because yes, we harvested them last week, but in a month they'll still be good in the refrigerator. Yep. Now going back to where you made the comment of having a freezer. Okay. Now let me ask you this. Did you have the freezer in your refrigerator or did you have a whole extra freezer?
Extra freezer. Like the box freezer, what do they call them? Yeah.
Chest freezer.
Chest freezers, yeah. So, we call it a deep freezer, but yeah.
Yep. I like that because when you're doing your money savings and you're getting stuff on sale, factor in that cost of that freezer. And then over time, how long does it take to pay for it? Because that's a really important thing to pay attention to in all of this, because we do the same thing. We have another freezer. Now, that being said, we paid $100 for a freezer 10 years ago. So that's $10 a year for the freezer. So it can add up. For instance, we had a freezer and my mom got wrapped up in the 80s in this, we'll give you the freezer, but you buy the food. And so they we had so many frozen whatevers and they ended up just not paying for it because it was so ridiculous and the people never came to get the freezer. So we kind of came out on head. I don't recommend doing this because I think it may be a little bit illegal, but the 80s apparently were a really hard time in America. From what I understand, it was a very hard time. Inflation was really high in the 80s as well. And a lot of people were struggling to eat. And apparently we were one of those groups of people. You were raising your hand?
Yeah, my main refrigerator is the refrigerator that I bought when I moved in 2007. It's been repaired over the years, but it's still cold. I have a thermostat in there, or a thermometer in there, I should say, and it's a side-by-side, right? Because I was all about what looks good. And so the freezer side still gets cold. And then I had a little bitty chest freezer that prior to moving here, my roommate and I bought. And as an aside, it was my first experience with, pay over it, 24 months, no interest. And I miscalculated the monthly payments. And then on the 25th month or the 24th month in one day, that interest hit. And baby, you better believe I will never make that mistake again. But anyway.
Oh, yeah.
That freezer is still kicking. That freezer is probably easily 20 years old, right? Yeah. But it's the things that I don't raise in those freezers, right? And so I budgeted in 2019 when I expanded to the front yard garden with the intention of growing more food. I already knew going in I wouldn't be able to eat all of the food fresh. That wasn't the goal, right? I knew I wanted to get it more into preserving, but I didn't know how much or what specifically I'd be preserving from a canning perspective. But I stand by is freezing some stuff. So anyway, I budgeted in 2019 to purchase a second deep freezer, because of what happens when this 20-year-old one goes out, and a refrigerator for the basement. You know, like some people, if you have a garage over a refrigerator in the garage, like you can't have one really in Chicago. It just gets too cold. So in 2022, I bought the second deep freezer. And in 2023, I bought the refrigerator, right? Worked out with the budget, you know, the timing was right. You get a holiday sale in the fall. And in both cases, primarily the refrigerator, it was with the garden in mind. It's the pickles that I want to make using the refrigerator method. It's the peppers. It's the fresh produce is coming out. It's the 10 heads of cabbage that I hope to get out of my garden, right? Like, I need a plan, and that's a part of my plan. And I said I started budgeting in 2019 for it because I'm folding that into an expense of living, but also my garden. Yeah. Right. You know, like this is the reason why I keep on coming back to, it's not about the price of the tomato. And it's okay if that tomato costs you $100. Okay. Maybe not that last part. I made that part up.
Yeah. You made that last part up. But you know, it's a common, joke that gardeners eat $100 tomato. And, you know, I think that's true at the beginning, but then, you know, a couple years into it, you're eating a 5-cent tomato. You know what I mean? And I think that's important to remember. And before we get to the question of the day, I want to say this out loud. If you are worried about it, in time, it gets better. So if you're first starting out, you are definitely going to be behind on the financial curve. But you will get ahead of that curve as these things age, because that's the design of a garden. And the other thing I want to say is, if you are, you know, just growing to make sure you're getting fresh food and you know where everything's coming from, you can accomplish this mission of saving money, growing fresh food and growing something that is not available in your store all in one. It just takes a little bit of effort. And the best way to do it is to start your own seeds. That's just hands down. Would you disagree with that statement at all?
I think the quickest savings for a gardener, period, hard stop, would be starting your own seeds. Yeah, so I agree.
Yeah.
Now, the biggest piece for me when it comes to all of this is it will very likely cost you more if you don't have a good plan going into wherever you are in your garden world or garden experience.
Yeah. Say that again.
One more time for the people in the back. If you don't have a good plan, if you're not working on and nurturing and updating your plan, it will likely cost you more money in the near term and long term. So it's really key that you focus on, what is this plan, incorporating all the things we talk about, and maybe even an app.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. And so, you know, this is an important thing to say. You guys know that the Planner app is a sponsor of the show, and it is a good reason. And it comes directly into this because the price of the app, before you use the link below to get the discount, will pay for itself if you plan your garden using the drag and drop interface in the square foot garden with the hundreds of seed varieties, the seed box, keeping track of it, now added flowers, companion and combative planting, and all the information provided, including pests and diseases. There you go. That's the condensed form of it. But and I hate that you used the word obedience earlier. I hate that word, but it applies because it's obedience / discipline. If you make your plan and using the Planter app, and you are disciplined enough to have the obedience to follow that plan, it will save you money in the long run. You will not even notice the cost of the app. So it's definitely something you should check out. It's available on the Apple and Google Play stores. It's the Planter app. And it's like Batavia said, if you're not planning your garden out with intention, then you're not going to accomplish anything. And a lot, when I say anything, I mean in relation to what we're talking about as far as cost savings and stuff like that, because you can accomplish all of these goals together. You can do it. And the cost savings doesn't have to be top of mind. It will just fall into place. Believe it or not, it will eventually fall into place. Yeah,
I think I can't stress enough the benefit of being able to adjust the plan, right? So, I have a plan scratched out, and then month by month, I'm making adjustments to it. But what I've been able to do this season is I came in with, I'd probably say like 90+% of what I want to do in the garden is when I'm actually doing it. But I've been able literally to plant a thing, go to the app and make the update because I want it now as I see the sun, and it's at the top of the sky. But guess what? This particular bed isn't getting a lot of that sun. And so I say, oh, it sounded good in December to put these plants here, but now I'm going to make that adjustment.
Yeah.
And it's that real life experience. And guess what that does? I have this within my Planter app. It's 2024 Garden Plan 2.0. It's going to make my 2025 garden plan that much better.
Yeah. Now, let me say this before we move on. This is the last thing, so we've got to get to the question of the day. I put in a $400 drip system last year. I'm gonna tell you, everybody, that hurt my feelings. But what I will say is the pressure it took off of me and the amount of produce that came out of it. And based on what we think we're calculating correctly, give me some grace here. We are probably going to break even on that payment this year. So just to put that into perspective, and it's still going strong. So, but that was a calculated decision to add that into our garden. And based on, the benefits that we've gotten out of it, it really has made that much of a difference in our cost savings coming from our garden. Now, it sets us back. We'll have to continue next year. If we break even this year, the next year we'll finally get back into the profits again. If I don't add anything else to my garden. Remember that. So when is this episode coming out?
We're just before summer. So like the second week of June.
Okay.
So there's still time.
Fertilizing pepper plants or when to start winter crops? Pick one.
Oh, fertilizing pepper plants.
It's fertilizing end statement, pepper plants end statement, or winter crops.
Fertilizing.
Okay. So on our community garden, our Backyard Gardens, Community Gardens Facebook page, Carrie writes, fertilizer question. If you are direct sowing seeds, what time frame do you start fertilizing after sprouting?
Hey, Carrie. I'm so glad I got a chance to say hey to you after the question was asked.
It's like, that's so rude that you would do that in public. So where do you sit with this?
General non-answer is it depends on the crop, but more specific answer. From the things I've been reading, because I've been paying much more attention to it now, it seems like 2 to 3 weeks after a plant has, from a transplant perspective, have been put into the ground is when the recommendation of fertilizing comes in. So if you go back to after you've seeded something, you've direct sowed it, it comes up, right? Think about the little bitty seedling that doesn't even have their true leaves. I'm going to say probably around the 4-week mark for most things.
Interesting. I fertilized day 1.
But didn't Carrie ask after?
She did.
Okay.
But I fertilized day 1 because I always do a pre-planting fertilizer.
Yeah.
Well,
shoot, I do too. Well, like if I'm planting at 2:00, my pre-planting fertilizer goes in at 1:55.
There you go. Now, and the reason, and this is a loaded question, and I'm sure Carrie didn't realize that, but it depends. Are you using synthetic? Are you using organic? Are you using liquid? Or are you using granular? I put my granular fertilizer in. That's organic at the time of planting, which means within 2 to 3 weeks, generally 3 weeks, it'll start breaking down and feeding the plant. So that's where I sit with that. I will come back around the 1 month mark and then I'll start injecting in my drip system liquid organic fertilizer at that point. If you're using a synthetic, I would probably, just like Batavia said, I'd wait until typically your first or second set of true leaves on those plants. And that's when I would do it. But yeah, I do day one. I always put down a pre-planting fertilizer. Basically, that just covers, that CYA. In case I forget, there's already fertilizer in the ground and I don't have to worry about it.
I think, interestingly enough, I have begun to be more consistent with that planting fertilizer than any time afterwards.
Pre-planting fertilizer.
Well, I mean, I'm doing it at the time of planting. That's the distinction I'm trying to make.
Yeah, I call it pre-planting fertilizer at the time of planting because it kind of, it separates it. But yeah, and it's once you get into that habit, it kind of, you're protected. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because the way you look at it is if it takes 2 to 3 weeks for it to start to break down, then because it's organic, it will continue to feed for weeks after that. So you will always get a portion of feeding there. So that's how I handle it. I'm sure you'll find across the board. Now, the question is what kind of fertilizer, meaning, different plants. For summer, I would go light on stuff like blood meal. I would not be adding a lot of blood meal in. And if I do add blood meal in, I do it like in the beginning. Blood meal is a high nitrogen fertilizer. And that way it'll get a boost in the beginning, and then that nitrogen will kind of wear out, and then the rest of it will kick in. What do you put down for your pre-planting, or as you call it, your planting fertilizer? What do you put down?
Fertilizer at the time of planting, it's an organic granular fertilizer that's pretty well balanced. I think it's the one I'm using now is a little bit higher in nitrogen. We were talking about this a couple of weeks back. Yeah.
So I do the same thing. I put in, I can't remember what it was. I think it's an 853 or something like that. But yeah, it's not crazy high or anything like that. And don't get hung up on the numbers. Just don't put anything down. It's like 4600 or 253 or anything like that. Try to get those numbers as close as possible, and you should be covered. Unless you have a soil test that tells you differently, just go basic.
A part of, for me at least, a part of the win is also creating a routine for yourself.
Yeah.
Right. So I'm still a work in progress when it comes to that, clearly.
Yeah. But I set triggers for myself for the next fertilizing, like what the plant's doing that triggers me.
Yeah, that's an interesting topic. Only because when you think about, like, if I'm growing only corn, it's pretty straightforward. Right. Yeah. But when you're planting things that you still may have some spring crops, you have summer crops, based on the next question of the day, you may even be getting into winter things, sowing it for fall, I should say. Things are growing at different rates. You have different crops within the garden because many of us are looking for a diverse garden when it comes to what we're planting. And so that's the part where it's like, ruh-roh, you know.
Exactly. I'm sorry, everybody. I'm still getting over this cold. It's dragging on. So look, if you want to be like Carrie and you want to ask a question, there are mostly two places that you can leave a question. One would be Backyard Gardens Community Garden, and the other one, which Leonard has so kindly put in the link below, is the email address bygquestion@gmail.com. They will get it's easier to keep track that way. So please send your questions there. If you leave one anywhere else, we would be you put question of the day in it, and we will try to get to it. But if you get in these two spaces, we are more than likely going to be able to hit that question. And what does this say, Batavia? I don't understand.
Oh, it's something for our offline conversation, as almost all of our IMs are. So I'm struggling with why you're bringing
I
up
thought
what
it was
wrote
a
in.
point to bring up right now.
No,
it seemed like something to bring up now. Okay.
No, I should have wrote, do you want me to go ahead and close us out, while you...
While I finish choking on
Yeah.
something? No,
Attempt to
everybody,
live.
have a beautiful day. And remember, continue to learn to grow. Oh, wait. Go get some seeds from our store below. And then continue to grow for change.
See ya.
Now you know why people feel like celebrating at harvest time.
All over the world, people have feasting and good times when the crops have been gathered in.
Thanks for checking out the show. If you like what we're doing and you'd like to support us, you can become a patron at patreon.com/backyardgardens, or you can be an Apple subscriber, and in both of those, you'll get an extra episode every month. You can also make a one-time PayPal donation with the link below, and you can get all kinds of gardening gear like t-shirts and mugs and cups from the link below at Teespring, and we have an Amazon store which has all the products that we use and recommend in our gardens, and it helps support our show. And we also add to this list periodically, so be sure to check it out periodically to see if there's anything that you need for your garden. Everything that you do, including a like and a subscribe and even a review, will help us learn to grow and grow for change.
See ya.